All right, so thank you to everyone that is here with us today. My name is Emily. I'm just going to be helping out a bit today. So today we have Dr. Chaneé Rudolph with us, and I'm going to read the short bio that we have, and then we're going to go right ahead and get started. So Dr. Rudolph is a licensed marriage and family therapist with a PhD in Christian counseling and educational training in forensic psychology. Dr. Rudolph approaches her work through a holistic, authentic healing lens, implementing cultural responsiveness while believing that everyone has a story worth telling and being told. She has been working with individuals and families since 2010 with experience in graduate level teaching. She is currently providing school-based and in-home therapeutic services for children, adolescents, and families through a cultural-specific school-based mental health program. Dr. Rudolph is trained in therapeutic approaches such as trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, managing adaptive practices, sand tray therapy, and eye movement desensitization reprocessing. She has presented both statewide and nationally as a cultural facilitator and keynote speaker on racial and historical trauma. In her work, she integrates therapeutic models along with cultural knowledge in order to create an in-depth awareness of discovering who we are and what we are capable of becoming. So without further ado, please take it away.
Thank you, Emily. Hello, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to share space with you all. I know I was connected to Samantha through my boss, the clinical manager of my program, Rudy Russo. And apparently he sees something in me where he was like, I'm connecting you with Sam. And I was like, all right, okay. So I know, thank you for reading my bio. It sounds really fancy. Honestly, I'm just here being me. And that's how I show up all the time. I do have some PowerPoint slides, but please, y'all, if you have questions, I am very experiential. I do not stick to slides if I don't have to. I don't show them if I don't have to, but I will, because I think it'll give some context to the topic today. I'll be kind of putting together a lot of different things. And so I'll start off by saying that, so I primarily right now work with kids and families who identify as being of African descent. I have worked with other cultures throughout my years as being a therapist, but right now, primarily, that's the framework I work at. So that's kind of how I deliver my information, but that is not to exclude any other culture or community group. I just want to make that known. And I often say that the information that I present can be connected to different cultures and communities, because I think we are all connected. And so when we use the framework and the mindset of showing up and sharing space with each other and creating sacred space, that we can do amazing, amazing, amazing things. And so today, like, I'll kind of touch on some things that I tend to talk about more, because I think it is at the core of our work when we're talking about doing cultural work, right? Whether that's with families, youth, other people within the field, other things like that. I think things like trauma, resilience, historical trauma, those things are rooted in our connections. And I think once those conversations start to happen, then we can show up as our true selves and really begin to do the work that a lot of people in our field feel that they are called to do, or feel that they have the inner strength to do this kind of work that a lot of people can't stomach. And so my PowerPoint's pretty short. I do have a video in there that I think is really good. It's about 5 minutes. So you'll have some time to not hear my voice, even though I think my voice is pretty amazing, but you know, hey, to each their own. So we'll have some time. I have a video in there, and then definitely as questions arise, please stop me and ask questions, or for sure I'm almost positive there'll be more than enough time after the presentation to dive into some dialogue, because that is what I like to do. Okay, so let's see if I can do this. I know I look a lot younger than I am, so I should be able to do this tech stuff. I've done it a couple times, but you know, let's see. We'll see how we do this. Okay. Okay, are you all able to see my screen? Yes, okay. Okay, did it flip to like the big slide? Okay, we're on to something. All right, so I just touted it, working with communities of color, the importance of multiculturalism. Again, that can be defined many different ways. And so as we go through the PowerPoint, please, if you have questions, all that good stuff. I don't know if I'll be able to see them when I'm presenting, but we'll make it work. So let's get started. Okay, so whenever I start any presentation that I have done, facilitation events, things like that, I always like to start with agreements, because I like to, again, create a space where we all can show up and be our true authentic selves. And so I often tell my clients that I walk around with this invisible backpack. This backpack is one that I have carried for many years and that I have the strength to carry. And so whatever you all feel you need to put in the backpack, I am here to hold space with you, and I am here to hold that with you, that we do not do this work alone. And so I'm here to do that. And so we all can, carry the weight of this backpack, but it is ours for this meeting. So some agreements I'd like to start off with is speak your truth, but hold my heart while you do it. We kind of, me and some of my colleagues, we stole that with permission, from this wonderful, wonderful clinician whose name is Vanessa Jackson, and she works out of the East Coast. And she considers herself to be a soul doula when doing this work. And so we said, we need this agreement. Can we steal it from you? And she said, absolutely. So just speak your truth, but hold my heart while you do it. Recognize who's in the room and who isn't in the room. Always respect, respect, respect. Be present. We're all here together. We're showing up together. And remember that the conversation doesn't end here, right? These conversations will continue to happen. So in this invisible backpack, just think of, whatever seems too hard to say it. Whatever seems too hard to see it. And whatever seems too hard to feel it. We are here together. So just some agenda, what we'd be talking about, right? I'll kind of touch on historical racial trauma, how we can show up in this field, and how that is related and connected to our work with teens, youth, families, and all different things like that. Like I mentioned before, I work with a specific culture, so my program is culturally specific, but the population that I work with are teens right now, so high schoolers. So all the sass, all of it, right? Like they're like trying to figure out their identity, sex, sexuality, all that good stuff that I love, they're bringing it to me. Oftentimes I feel like an auntie. And so we'll touch on that a little bit as well if you guys have questions or anything. And please, again, ask for what you need. So just some things to consider that I'll be kind of touching on, like I kind of mentioned, like the trauma and the resilience. Here are just some definitions that I'm sure we all know. Just thinking of trauma and what trauma is, that experience that we run past that depletes our crisis meeting resources, right? It's something that happens that oftentimes is unexpected. And then on the other hand, we have resilience, right? The process of adapting. I know a lot of people like to say that resilience is like that, like bouncing back. And I have challenged myself to kind of say, well, maybe it's not so much that it's bouncing back from a situation, but that it's moving through something, right? People who have resilience are constantly finding the strength to move through different stresses or stressors, move through different traumatic events and things like that. And so when you look at trauma and resilience, oftentimes you're looking at the pain and the power. And so how do we hold these two things when we're working with people and showing up? And how do we hold the pain and the power within ourselves? And so thinking of, trauma and resilience, historical trauma, right? When we think of showing up to work with those who are from different communities other than ourselves, who identify differently culturally, whatever that may be or look like, we have to think about what are the things that their culture or their community has experienced over an expansion of time. And so not just these little traumatic events, but really digging deep into what is going through or what is happening within these cultures and communities. Even if we just look at the youth groups, right? A lot of youth right now are finding themselves in the streets advocating, protesting, doing different things. And we have to stop and think, like, what is it that's pulling them to really do these things? And so I have a video. Let's see if we can make this work, y'all. Can you guys see the video? My screen? Okay, no, so I have to stop sharing and reshare. Okay. Okay, so now I'm gonna reshare. I'm getting the hang of this, y'all. Look at me. Okay. Okay, you guys can see in here? Awesome. All right. So this video just kind of touches on historical trauma. Oh, did I pull up the right one? Oh, let's see. We'll see if I got the right one, y'all.
The seed level of...
What matters in life is not what happens to you, but what you remember and how you remember it.
My dad said when they were growing up, they said, we used to play cowboys and Indians. And he started telling me this story. And we used to fight over, nobody wanted to be the Indian. And he said, I didn't think about that. We'd all play, and I'd always suck it up, and I'd be the Indian. But how ironic is it for a bunch of Indian children to be playing cowboys and Indians, and nobody wants to be the Indian? The introduction of a destruction of culture and loss of what is good. And I asked my dad, well, why didn't anybody want to be the Indian? And I thought I knew the answer. He said, because everybody knows the Indian dies. And that already in his generation, as strong as he was, he received a message as a young child. I received the same message, that it was not good to be Indian.
Slavery, colonization, forced relocation, and other historically traumatic events in generations past have lingering and profound consequences today. But what is historical trauma?
Historical trauma has to do with collective, cumulative emotional wounding over and across generations that results from massive cataclysmic events. These are events that don't just target an individual, but they target a whole collective community. Things like forced relocation from traditional homelands, like the Trail of Tears, like my ancestors went through. But the process that our communities talk a lot about is that the trauma is held personally, and it can be transmitted over generations. So even family members who have not had a direct experience of the trauma itself can feel the effects of that event generations later.
Does historical trauma only affect certain groups of people?
What really helps me to help people understand the notion of historical trauma is that it's actually a phenomenon that lots of communities, indigenous communities, or people all over the world have sort of struggled with. It's not something that specifically is only owned by tribal people or indigenous people. It gets articulated all over the world.
Historical trauma is widespread, affecting many communities across the globe.
Observation has, from the empirical side, started with work on the Holocaust survivors. And there's a lot of work on intergenerational transmission of trauma. And it's moved into also looking at Japanese internment survivors, Armenian survivors, descendants of their Holocaust, and so forth. So there's been some more empirical work in this area. And you can imagine trying to track trauma over generations and trying to tease out what is the impact over generations on this child, combined with whatever traumatic events they've gone through in their childhood and in their lifetime.
Historical trauma is passed on across generations.
I say to you, acknowledgement is due my grandfather, Pop. He never told us the stories of why he did certain things. He never shared with us why he never cried, for example. He never shared with us why he walked out the door when my grandmother cried. Why he turned his back when she cried. Of course we thought he turned his back because he didn't care, of course. But he turned his back, as I look back now, because the pain has no words. I still have the images of him dealing with the limitations that he was up against. I can only imagine the But what I do know is that it didn't go away. It came inside into those of us who followed him.
No one ever talks about the moment you found out that you were white, or the moment you found out that you were black. That's a profound revelation. The minute you find that out, something happens. You have to renegotiate everything, and that's a profound psychological moment.
I saw a water fountain that said white in color. My family was 7 kids by then. We drank a lot of Kool-Aid. So colored water, that was in my cognitive schema. So I go toward this colored water fountain. And while I'm there, just before I get there, there's a little white girl who saw that same colored water fountain, and she was just about to turn the sprocket when her mother came and grabbed her by the arm. And she said, "You cannot drink from that colored water fountain." And she said, "But I want the colored water! I want the colored water! Oh, I want the colored water!" So I knew it must be good. So I run to the colored water fountain, looking for my mom, making sure she won't stop me from drinking. And I turned the water fountain, and it was clear, just like at home. That day, that trauma, I remember to this moment.
Okay, so before I get back to the presentations, any questions, comments, concerns, or reactions to that video? All right, I'll get back to the PowerPoint. Okay, so that's one of my favorite videos to show, just because it just really highlights the different things that different communities are going through, especially when we're thinking about showing up and working with different people. We have to be very cognizant of what has gone on throughout generations, how people are showing up themselves, what are, even as like me as a clinician, I need to know what I'm stepping into, and not in a negative way, but I need to be aware of the different cultural dynamics that I'm stepping into that may be different from mine or similar. And then I still have to understand how to show up. Even me being a clinician of color, working with Black babies, I call them babies. I know they're teenagers, but they're all babies to me. But working with these Black babies, I too have to be very aware of who I am and how I show up, because I do work in a system that doesn't work for people who look like me. And so it's almost as if I have to actually work 10 times harder to prove to the people I'm working with, yep, I get it. I know this doesn't work for me. It doesn't work for you, but I'm trying to make change. That's why I'm here. And people are usually shocked when they hear that, because they're like, "Oh, Chaneé, you probably connect with your family very well." And I'm like, well, no, not all of them. A lot of my families are low income who have, experienced chronic homelessness, very intense trauma, very chronic trauma. That is very different from what I've experienced. And so even me pulling up in a certain kind of car, right? They could be like, "Oh, well, you don't know me," So different things like that we just have to be aware of. And also being aware of our language, how we show up with other people, and being mindful that people are experiencing things such as microaggressions every single day. And me and some of my colleagues have even kind of pushed that micro out the way and just said aggressions. People are experiencing aggressive behaviors every day, whether it's their sexuality, whether it's their the color of their skin, whether it's their religious beliefs, whatever it may be, people are experiencing things. And so we have to not take it personally, one, when they if they push back on us, but also just being aware of what different things are happening daily. Uh-oh. There we go. So This is a beautiful quote from Dr. Ken Hardy, just talking about trauma-informed work. And I was actually just in a consultation with him, so this is just funny. But one of the things that he says is that when you're doing trauma-informed work, like you have to understand that trauma-informed and race-informed must go hand in hand, right? When we're working with communities of color, these things are hand in hand. Trauma and race are both present, no matter what. But the piece of the quote that I love is that he says that there is not a post-traumatic option for people of color. We're dealing with this every moment. So again, when we're thinking about multiculturalism, we're thinking about working with different people of different communities, that there are some people who don't have the option to not deal with what society is throwing at them, right? They can't choose to walk away from certain things. It is in their face daily. And now it's all over social media all the time. And so you literally don't have a moment to breathe, to get away from everything that society is throwing at you that's saying that you are a bad person, or you who look like this, or who identify this way, you are this. And so that's what we're going to throw at you. But I mean, deal with it, right? So just thinking about, again, what people are holding and sitting with every day. And so a big part of my work, I consider myself to be more of a narrative therapist, but I love stories, I love language, and I love how people can shift that and make it their own. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about dominating narrative and counter narratives, and how narrative itself is often rooted in trauma. And so narratives, right? These are stories of and tools, ways that we make meaning. I could remember sitting when my grandmother was alive. I would just sit at her feet and she would be in her rocking chair. And she would tell stories from back when she lived in Mississippi years ago. I mean, she just had these stories that just flow as if it was yesterday. But then I would ask my grandma what she did yesterday, and she couldn't tell me anything, you know? But that's because these stories and these experiences that she had back when she was in Mississippi, and how, you know, what caused her to move up here with 8 children on her own after my grandfather passed, like these stories were meaning making for her. They shaped who she became as a single mother who moved to the North from the South. So when we're thinking about narrative, they are so deeply rooted, and they're so powerful when we sit and take the time to listen to them. So the dominating narrative, or the dominant narrative, which we kind of said dominating because the narrative can shift when we're willing to do the work to make it shift. But the dominating narrative is generally described as a colonial-derived version of events, emphasizing Eurocentric right perspectives. And so there are these dominating narratives that I'll just speak for within the US that are very common, and that have become the narrative for certain communities that we all, you know, often tend to work with. Even if we don't realize that these narratives are present, they are very present. And even for people within those communities, these narratives are often present as well. And so the work that I tend to do with a lot of people is creating counter narratives, right? It's this narrative that goes against that dominating narrative. And it goes against like that commonly held belief. And so, for example, just because I work like within the school system, a dominating narrative that I tend to hear a lot is like parents can be hostile and abusive. Like they come in schools and they're big mama bear and big papa bear, and they're causing chaos. They're not listening. They're not connecting with the school staff, all these different things. And like an example of a counter narrative to that language could be that these parents are often desperate to protect their children, right? They're coming in these schools, they're hearing all these negative things about their kids, and they're like, wait, hold on. Let me go up there, let me go get my kid, let me get my child. Now, I do also say to parents that I work with who may tend to display these behaviors, like, and you know, you can't dismiss the behaviors, right? But also creating a space for them to open up and say, this is what I'm feeling, this is how I am. And so it's just shifting our narrative and our perspective of how we see others, and how people show up. So then how do we begin to like create that sacred space? And I like sacred space better than safe space, because safe isn't something that everybody feels, but sacredness is something that can be created. So Dr. Joseph White, he was known as like the godfather of Black psychology. He passed away several years ago, but we use a lot of his principles. And in one of his articles on the 7 psychological strengths of African Americans, one thing when I'm working with folks on doing that cultural work, right, is understanding that because of the history of this country, because of what is happening, I mean, even playing out before our eyes right now, is that there is a healthy suspicion of white people when it comes to a lot of people of color because of what they have experienced in the past. And I think when we name that, then again, we can look and view certain things very differently, right? And again, it opens the door for a lot of work to be done. And again, this is, you know, he was specifically talking about African Americans. So I'm just using this as an example, but just really being mindful and aware of what people are sitting with, and why there may be a lot of pushback to get services, or why they may be so hesitant to do any of the work when they're sitting across from somebody who doesn't look like them. And then what does that hesitancy look like when it is somebody who looks like them? Because they're still trying to figure out, what are you doing here for me? And so his article is great, but it just gives us some insight of what, again, people may be sitting with. Another thing from Dr. Ken Hardy, as he talks about the 5 critical relationship principles. And so, and he said this is just, you know, across racial differences. And so he looks at intensity, which is risking beyond our comfort, intimacy, being vulnerable on both ends, right? Both sides of the couch. Authenticity, are you genuine? Are you showing up as your true authentic self? And if you're not, what's stopping you? What's hindering you from doing that? Congruency, matching words and affect, right? Like incongruency does not work for certain communities. Like, and I say, even with the teens I work with, I tell teachers all the time, they know what you think about them. And that's exactly how they're going to show up. They're going to give you exactly what the labels and the words that you're throwing at them. I have some kids who come in my office and they're like, Miss Chaneé, nope, that teacher thinks I'm stupid. And I said, okay, so like, how do you go up against that? Like what's your response to that? And probably 9 times out of 10, they're like, well, I sit there and I act stupid. And I'm like, okay, you know, we go there, we talk about it. But to them, they're like, I know I'm smart. I know I can do this. But if they don't think I can, then who cares? I'm not going to waste my time. And so that congruency, right? Like, are we being real with what we're bringing or what we're presenting? And then transparency, again, willingness to show up as yourself and be seen. So just a couple other tools. You guys can probably tell we love Dr. Hardy. He consults with us a lot. He's great. So we use all his stuff. But he has the VCR method. And so it's validate, challenge, and request. And it's so funny because every time we like had, you know, you got to show a picture of a VCR, right? Like it's a VCR. And so it's just, you get a good laugh out of it. But validate, challenge, and request. So, you know, when we're in community with people, when we are creating and developing relationships, to be mindful, like, are you validating enough? You know, I hear you, I see you. Like sometimes all people want to do is be seen. They want to know that, do you see me for who I am? Can I show up and be my true self with you? Again, can I create that sacred space with you? And then once you know, have that validation, challenge, then you can be like, okay, I hear what you're saying. Like, so for my kids who are like, nope, they think I'm dumb, I'm gonna be dumb. And I'm like, okay, but what about this, right? Like, I mean, I'm also, okay, can we look at it this way? Like, can we kind of push back on that a little bit and kind of shift our perspective? And then from there, then a request, this example here, like, can we work together to try and do blank? Again, it's showing them I'm here for you. You're not in this alone. And then one of the things that he says is that if challenging isn't working, then you haven't done enough validating. So to go back, if you are you not in a position to be able to challenge somebody, then go back and maybe provide some more validation, strengthen that relationship. Or again, rewind, like VCR, you have to go and press the button. Yep, just do a little rewinding. And then just some additional culturally affirming reminders when we're thinking about building strong relationships. You have to invest in relationships. It is so important that we put ourselves into this while also creating healthy boundaries. We have to take care of ourselves. But there is going to be some work that you have to put in. Those positive messages. I think people can be so quick, especially within the schools that I work with, they're so quick to call parents with negative messages. And we're like, no, wait, back up. Like, can you give them some positive messages so that people aren't so quick to shut you down? So really holding space for all the goodness, as well as the things that we can challenge people on. Using person first language. And so working with a lot of the teachers, we're like, if you are in a classroom and you are teaching about the history of African Americans, try changing words from slavery to enslaved people, right? Like, these were people who were enslaved. Slavery does not define who they are, and it is not all of their culture or all of their history. It's a part of it. And so just something just as simple as person first language, showing up and asking people, how would you like for me to address you? How do you identify things like that, right? Because we are not the experts, they are. So we need to show up and allow them to be them. One thing that Dr. Bravada speaks on, she says that when we're doing this work, she says, become aware of your own cultural background. Oops. My computer just did something, sorry. It says, become aware of your own cultural background, become convinced that just because someone else's customs and beliefs are different from yours, there are no right or wrong cultural beliefs. Allow people to teach you and allow yourselves to be taught as well. So we have to have space where we are the teacher and when we are learning different things. And again, Dr. Hardy again, but he speaks on, the 8 steps of healing the hidden wounds of trauma. But the 3 that I like to kind of point out is creating space for race, again, that validation, and then rechanneling rage. There are so many folks sitting with so much anger, so much fear, so much heaviness. And how do we not push that away, right? We don't demonize that, but we allow them to explore that rage without letting it overtake them, that they can rechannel it in different ways, and that they can know that you have a right to feel what you feel. Let's feel that together. And then what do we do with it? And so allow people to show up and be their true selves. And the most important is our relationship with ourselves. We need self-reflection. We need consultation. We need all those things. We cannot do this work alone. Regardless of what that work looks like for you, we need people in our corners. We need that support. And so, continuing to explore those questions, what am I bringing to this relationship? And this could be personally or professionally. What am I bringing to this relationship? And which experiences from my life are showing up in challenging moments? Being real with ourselves. How are we showing up? Who are we? Continuing to do that deep work. Because I don't think it ever ends. I think we are a continuous book that is just being written every single day. And so how do we continue to give ourselves some love and some grace and explore what that is for us. And so just to recap on some of the things we talked about, you know, being sure that you want to do this work, whatever that work is, always knowing what is your why. You know, are you able to adapt and be uncomfortable when it's needed? And be honest with yourself. What are your biases? Like I've done this work, and it is not easy work. And I've had to, you know, really dig deep and say, what are my biases about my own community and the communities of others that aren't, you know, the same as mine? And again, those narratives, you know, starting to shift our language, starting to shift what we're allowing ourselves to believe and really do the work for ourselves. And that sense of self, that language and self-awareness is always important. And so just some books that I have found to be amazing. Just some good work. These books just bring so much education and so much good work. And so I like to throw those in there. And then questions, comments, or concerns. So I will stop sharing. Ooh, I did it. And I will open the space and just say, hey, y'all, what's on your minds? What's on your hearts? If there's anything I didn't address that you have questions or you want to get into some conversation about, let's do it.
I'll go first. One thing that I was really curious about, until we had invited you to come speak, I had never heard of like a PhD in Christian counseling before. So I'm just like really interested what role your faith plays in your practice and like what that looks like for people that like share your faith, and then what that looks like when you're working with people that don't.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you. That's an amazing question. I offer that specialty, I would say, outside of my job that I do now. And so I think if we're honest with ourselves, like every part of ourselves shows up in therapy in some way. But that is not something that I necessarily offer at the job that I'm at right now. And it's not necessarily something that I talk about, unless somebody asks like what my PhD is in. And so I just operate as a marriage and family therapist who is interested and curious about everyone who steps into my office, and it's all about them and their stories. And then when I do work on the side, if somebody is specifically asking for somebody who has or who can bring light to Christian views or values, if that's what they want, to go there specifically and talk about that, then we go there. And so for me personally, it's a part of who I am, but it's not all of who I am. And so I bring it when it's necessary. And when it's not, I show up and I do my work with my people. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I have a question. You talked about like letting people show up authentically and essentially not tone policing people. And like if you have a client that's experiencing, you know, interactions where they are being told like, oh, your expression isn't okay, like tone it down and express it in a different way, how do you recommend like they facilitate that interaction further, because they're being told, oh, your expression isn't okay, even though what you've experienced is so intense? How do you facilitate that?
Mm-hmm. So I always sit in the stance of curiosity, of wanting to know what is it that they're trying to express, and what is compelling them to express it the way they're wanting to express it, because that's just as important as like if we're really talking about somebody showing up being their true authentic self, you know, sometimes rage is their true authentic self, right? And so for a lot of my teens, I actually have a teen right now who a lot of our conversation has been around when he's like, Miss Chaneé, I'm terrified of my rage, but I need to get this out. But when I get it out, I am labeled as this big Black boy who is destructive. And he's not a little guy. Like he's a pretty big dude. And so he's like, I'm labeled as this scary Black boy, but when you sit with him, I'm like, oh, sweet. Like he is the sweetest peanut. And so we talk about, I give him space to know that his expression is valid. And then I use that narrative work, right? So I'm like, okay, so you're angry and you're rageful, and that is righteous. Like that is righteous rage. Like, what do we do with that? How do we dig deep into where that rage is coming from? And then how do we express it in a way where you're not harmed? Because we know that if you express it the way that you want to, I don't know what may happen to you, right? And so we have really emotional talks about, he uses different things, music, to release that rage, like speak it, get that out, scream, like whatever word you need to say, come in here and say it. If you feel like you need to yell at somebody, give it to me. Because I know once you're done, we're still gonna love each other. You're gonna go out there, right? Love each other, with boundaries, guys, with boundaries. But, I'm like, I'm still gonna see you for who you are. If you're like, I've had kids who've been in class and been like, have texted me in class and be like, are you in your office? I need to come see you. And I'm like, dude, you're in class. No, like, what are you doing? And they're like, nope, I need to get out now. Because if I don't, I'm gonna live up to that label. I'm like, all right, I'll meet you in the hallway, if I'm not with another client. And so I tell them to express it different ways. So you write it, you dance it. If you need to protest, you go out and protest. If you need to draw something, you draw it. If you need to scream and yell, you scream and yell. But do it with somebody who sees you and knows where that pain is coming from. And so I don't know if there's ever like a right way to get them, what am I saying? I don't know if they will ever 100% like genuinely, authentically release that, because the way they want to release it, they can't. And so you give them pockets to release enough to where they can manage it and maintain it and continue to explore it. Because I think even like for him, that rage is going to be a lifelong journey of unpacking, where I don't know if there's ever an end to feeling that, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. What else? What else? I'm a therapist, y'all, so silence is my thing.
I do have another question. I think it's funny that you say that. All my professors that are like therapists will always be like, I don't care if it's quiet, I'm used to it. So it's just funny hearing someone else say that. But I'm curious more generally, like I feel like there's a lot of opportunities on our campus, at least, to work with children that experience trauma. And like, that's definitely something I'm interested in. And so I'm just curious more generally, what advice you have for like people that want to work with that population.
Buckle up. I think trauma work is beautiful work. It is not easy by any means. And that's, no matter the trauma, I think everybody who like receives services or comes to see you, or what, I think everybody has experienced some form of trauma, right? The scale is very, very long and wide. But I think when you're desiring to do trauma work, you really have to prepare yourself to not take things personally. There are a lot of times where people are responding from that trauma brain when they're showing up, and they are going to give you, because you become their person. Like you are truly their person, and not just them. Like me, I work with the family, so I am my client person and then their entire family. Like you really find yourself integrated into all that chaos and everything that's happening when you're trying to unpack all these things. And so there are times where clients are gonna just have a trauma response, and it's not about you. Like you really become that person where they can give you that ickiness and show you all of that yuck. I just had a client fire me a couple weeks ago. I've been fired, you guys, so many times by clients, fired and hired. Like it just happens. You get used to it. But that's because I've worked with, these kids and families who have experienced trauma, and we started to unpack her sexual trauma. And I knew the minute we opened that door that she was gonna run, like she was gonna take off, but I wasn't sure if I would get her back. And it happened. We opened that door to her sexual trauma. She spilled everything. And after that session, she was done with me. Like she was like, I don't want to work with her anymore. She keeps asking me these questions. And I had worked with her for months. So she knows my style. We've done this dance together. But she was like, nope, I think I'm good now. Like, I don't need therapy, all that stuff. And she didn't talk to me for weeks. And she was probably the first client that I ever took it like personally, because I was like, you are not gonna stop. Like you are breaking up with me. Like I don't appreciate you not working with me right now. What is happening? I've had it done before, right? I've been fired by clients, but her trauma story triggered me in my own stuff to where I was like, this is deeper than just her, Chaneé. And you know why she's doing that. And I was like, yep, And so you have to do that dance of how long do I chase her to let her know I'm still here, but also give her the autonomy to say, I don't want you right now. And I think that in trauma work shows up a lot. See you, Corey. In trauma work, that shows up a lot. Where you have to allow people to say, I can't do it. Even when they're thick in, like when you have just cracked open this huge can of worms or this wound that's now open, you're just like, no, you can't leave right now. Like, no, you're too open. But you have to allow them to either want you or not want you. And I think that is the root of trauma work that I think is hard. Is that sometimes we just plant a seed. We may not see the fruit of our labor, or not our labor, their labor, really. We may not see the tree that we, maybe years down the line, maybe not at all. But I think with trauma work, that is the hardest thing to sit with sometimes. But it is great work, so yes, do it. We need more people.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else? Any other questions or things I didn't touch on, or things you don't understand?
I was just going to say, oh, I'm sorry. Did I interrupt someone? Oh, okay. I was just going to say, the VCR thing for me is very powerful. And what I'm taking from that, the one part that really has stuck with me this whole time is you validate and then you challenge. And if you're challenging and it's not working, go back to validation. Mm-hmm. That is it's such a super powerful image for me, and just thinking about people that I've worked with in the past who really didn't get validation in whatever environment they were in, and how important that is. And how I love the whole imagery of that, the rewind, the VCR thing. So that's really good. So thank you for that.
Yeah. I love that illustration as well, because I think oftentimes people sometimes you have to rewind over and over and over again, and that can be draining and exhausting.
Yeah.
But that is part of the work, you know, where you're like, oh no, this ain't working, I have to go back, you know.
Yeah.
And then you go a little bit, you know, you go forward a little bit, and you're like, nope,
Not yet.
gotta go back. You know?
Yeah.
Thank you. And I see some questions in the chat. Jonathan, to your question, what are some of your thoughts when working with someone who has different identities than your own? Listen, I love it. I do not consider myself to be an expert by any means in anything that I've done, because I am ever learning, right? And so I approach everything of like, teach me who you are, because everybody's so different. Like there's not one kid or one family that I've worked with that is the same. Regardless if they've experienced the same thing or come from the same community, I'm like, who are you? And let me learn who you are, and let's figure out how we do this together. So having those unique connections with everybody, I mean, I'm a systemic thinker anyways, and so I love that. I just love getting to know different parts of who people are. And so those are my thoughts when working with someone who, you know, has different identities than my own. I'm learning. It's another class where I'm like, all right, what do you got for me today? What are we learning today? Who are you presenting to me today? And we go there, we work with that. Rose, you said, how does one come to regularly work with trauma? Is it specific training or luck of the referral? Both. So there are those who are like specifically trained in certain kinds of trauma, working with certain kinds of populations. I know I have a colleague right now who's like a trauma consultant, and so she really focuses, like her work is working with people like with trauma and attachment or early childhood trauma, things like that. So it can be tailored and specific. I mean, and or people like me, like I have different trainings, but I think for me, it's more so the population I work with brings a lot of trauma. And so naturally, I kind of fell into doing a lot of trauma work. But it wasn't never anything that I was like, oh, I want to be like a trauma therapist. It's just like, nope, I kind of got it. And I was like, all right. So let me get training and let me do some things. While also we all bring our own stuff, right? And the work that we've done ourselves. But yeah, but so it's both in. Mm-hmm.
I have a question, Chaneé. When you're working with clients, how do you work with someone with that historical trauma kind of framework who might not be aware of maybe the history of their culture or their community? How do you kind of like bring that in to help them maybe get a better picture of some of that and how it might be affecting them now?
Mm-hmm. So since I started, I want to say before I started working at the organization that I'm at now, I knew that like things like race and trauma were present, but I had not yet done my own work. And so I wouldn't necessarily bring it up. I would kind of see if it came up, and then we would kind of discuss it and explore it. Now I'm way more intentional. So I almost address those things immediately. I tell people the way I work, you know, my approach to things, especially if there's for the kiddos that have had a different cultural background or cultural identity. I mean, we're talking about that a couple sessions in. But again, because I always ask, like, who are you? You know, if you had to identify yourself, even when I do my assessments, I always ask people, like, I need your voice in this. I'm writing it. Yeah, my license is on it, but you have to be in this because it's not about me. And so I'm asking people right away, tell me who you are. How do you show up? And then I ask more detailed questions about their cultural history to see what they do know or what their narrative is. For the kids I work with within my program now, our program is tailored around cultural representation and cultural heritage and ancestry. And so we intentionally bring that up because that's what our program's known for. That's kind of how we get some of the dollars. And so, you know, we're laying it on the table of like, for at least because I work with like, can you even name some of your ancestors? Like, do you know that slavery is not where your history begins, sweetheart? And a lot of them are like, no, what are you talking about? And I'm like, oh, let me get on my laptop. We're about to research. We're going to look at some videos, whether that's even music. I asked them, what kind of music do you like? Okay, let's just trace this music back. Let's go back. Let's see where it comes from, where it originates from. And so I've learned to become more intentional about asking people those narrative questions of tell me your story, who are you? And setting the diagnosis to the side and be like, we'll get there, but I need you to tell me who you are. And how that's connected to what diagnosis I may give them, right? And so we kind of link all the pieces together. But yeah, I show up and I'm like, yep, I see you. What you bringing? What you giving to me today? And I find that I think people are becoming more open to those conversations because again, it's that I see you piece, right? Like even if our skin tone looks the same, we are not the same person. You have to tell me who you are. And so that's kind of what I've done.
Thanks.
And sometimes I show up in cut up, ripped up jeans, y'all. I just cut up.
All right, do we have any last minute questions? Because we are getting close to 5 and I don't want to infringe on anything else anyone else has going on. So if we have any last minute questions, we'll do that and then we can wrap up. Does that sound good? All right, anything else, guys, folks? All right, wonderful. Yeah, let me know if you guys think of anything afterwards. And I think that as a group, we might be able to get those to you if anyone comes up with any questions. But I really appreciate you coming to talk to us today. It was really informative. I learned a lot. I really appreciate it. I think we can wrap up. Thank you guys so much for attending. Appreciate it.
Yes, thank you all.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Emily. Bye.
Goodbye.